Hello once again, everyone. So now we're going to graduate from the guards that are all point forward and focused on thrusting, as well as the offhand weapons. And now we're going to talk about the systems of backsword and broadsword and military saber. Pretty much all of these end up just about the same. And so for that reason, I'm going to use my backsword today, but you could do these with a saber, you could do these with whatever. And you will find certain modifications on each depending upon whatever source you're looking at. I've recently been reading a German manual on using the saber, which is quite different. There's also Saber, who is a Dutch saber fighter who describes different strategies. Generally, though, the positions tend to boil down to the same thing because there's only so many ways you can stand with a sword that has hand protection. So today, we're going to focus on the offensive guards. Now, when it comes to especially the British systems, you have offensive and defensive guards. That is, you have guards that you take because you are able to defend/launch an attack most often, or you have guards that are designed just to protect yourself. And sometimes they are referred to as just the parries, but it can be used interchangeably. So for example, if I said outside half hanger, that is a defensive guard, versus if I was talking about taking the hanging guard, that is an offensive guard. So we're just going to go over them real quick, a little bit about them, and this shouldn't be too long of a video because they're pretty simple. So first and foremost, let's talk about the hanging guard. Now, the hanging guard is formed by just extending your arm up. Make sure to keep your shoulder down. Don't let it start coming forward because that's going to really hurt. So let your shoulder come down into its socket. Just extend your arm up naturally. And ideally, your tip should be generally pointed at your opponent's right eye, is where you're generally told to aim it. You don't have to hold it as extended as I am right now. You can also let the tip come down some. This is specifically referenced as you let the tip come down, so it's a bit more of a literal hanging guard. You will see sometimes a hanging guard formed more over to my left to invite an attack on this line. You will see it sometimes formed more over to my right to invite an attack on this line. The hanging guard can kind of be modified for whatever you want to do, and depending upon what strategies you want to employ, can kind of be everything. You also see sometimes, especially when it comes to single stick, hanging guards that are taken a lot more pronounced. So in this case, I'm leaning very far back to defend my head, and I am now pretty safe, especially at my height. I can launch attacks without worry about getting hit myself. And as most people who played with these also played with single sticks, you can still see it appearing. Now that one's obviously more risky because they can cut you in the leg, but depending on what you're doing. Now, what actions can you form out of the hanging guard? Pretty much all of them. If I'm up here, I can launch into a 7 most naturally, a 1, I can launch into a 2, I can even drop my arm down for a 3. In that case, you can use mostly your wrist to cut from below. It's a very neat, snappy cut. You can always launch into a very snappy 4, which I personally really enjoy, especially if I withdraw my guard slightly, so I let this tip hang down some. Someone else comes up to me with a hanging guard, boom, just pop that point underneath their hanging guard and catch them in the chin. Very useful. But for the most part, it's just an offensive high line, and you can very easily fold into defensive guards that we'll talk about next time. Hanging guard is going to be one of the first ones you learn, especially if you're doing Angelo's lessons, in which case pretty much the first 5 or 6 all have to do with you starting in the hanging guard, because it builds up your strength. It teaches you how to cut using the right muscles. It teaches you all about defending yourself, so it's generally a good thing, right? Now, the next guard we'll talk about is going to be the outside guard. So from the hanging guard, all I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop my hand down, and I'm going to curl my wrist to the outside, so that way my basket, from my perspective, this is what it looks like, is like so. Now, the reason that I'm curling my basket out like that is because I want to protect the maximum amount of my outside line, and I'm making myself quite strong by basically aligning my true edge. It's not that you can't form it this way, it's that this is generally pretty good. It's also very comfortable to hold. It takes a little while to get used to, but once you're used to it, it's pretty solid. And once again, generally the point is supposed to be at the opponent's right eye. I tend to let it go over to their left eye instead. That just feels a little better for me. Now from here, I am of course very able to parry pretty much everything, and the inside and outside guards are both offensive and defensive guards. So you will hear, for example, parrying in the inside guard or an inside parry or an outside. That is exactly what I'm talking about here. So it's just with Angelo that'd be done with the shift. So From the outside guard, once again, I can launch pretty much all cuts. There's a 7, there's a 1. With the 2, I would have to pull my tip back and then launch out basically a little percussive cut, which is quite a lot of fun. Turn my wrist over for a 3, turn my wrist over for a 4, all the great stuff. Now, moving on from the outside guard, we're going to form the inside guard. And there's a couple different little details you can do depending upon who you are learning from. So the way I was taught, because I was taught mostly by Angelo, is, or rather I was taught the system of Angelo by someone. But the way I was taught is we turned and we also took our foot and moved a little bit to the inside. This is to, rather than the wider sort of outside, I'm going to move a little bit more narrow so I can fight on the inside line, which aligns me a bit more. I also prefer to take my inside like I'm shaking someone's hand, so like so, as opposed to other manuals will describe it specifically as being the nails are up, which tends to mean that the sword, much like the outside guard, is held a little bit more flat in this plane. Now there's nothing wrong with this. Like I said, manuals tell you to do it, but I personally don't like doing it because, like I said in the video on the 8-cut, I am very used to taking risks and also fighting people who are very used to taking risks, especially from below. That's a big target, and so I prefer to keep it at a handshake, which still does everything the inside guard needs to do while adding a little bit more protection on the part of my lead arm. However, if you're going for most accurate to source, other sources tell you to do otherwise, so do what you will. Now from the inside guard, again, gonna be one of your favorites. I tend to like to open with an outside guard and then move to an inside guard with my parry and all that great stuff, but you can do everything you normally do. I can launch a 2, I just pull my tip back. A 1 now becomes the narrow one. A 7, no problem. 4, right? 3, all these great things. Pretty much nothing insane. Now, the only other guard left to us that is an offensive guard, specifically, at least within Angelo, and Hutton as well, is going to be the medium guard. And this is a weird one, right? So the medium guard is held straight up with the basket held out in front. Now what you're not supposed to do is actually stand here and try to fight like this. The medium guard can be thought of a lot like long point, right? It is the thing that you move through. So for example, if I am going to deliver a 1-cut, boom, that is either a feint or they parry, and then move into a 2-cut, I move through the medium guard as I attack. It's also particularly useful if you're looking to feint against someone, so I'm here, I just stay in the medium guard, but I tilt my point / fake with my body. Jay Moss, who, if you haven't started watching him and you're interested in this, seriously go watch him from Winnipeg. He is a fantastic backsword fighter, and I'm so glad I got to fight him because I learned a lot just in those few passes. But he uses this incredibly well, and so I can attest firsthand that it works. So, for the most part, that's all of our offensive guards, but let's talk a little bit about some variations, because of course when it comes to Broadsword specifically, we have old and new styled. So, well, rather old and regimental. So what we had just went over was the regimental style. Old style, however, has different footwork and different stance. So if I were to take a old style hanging guard, I would actually be standing a lot more square. Now I am not standing in a full-on horse stance. I am still standing with my right foot in front, but my stance is wider, and my hand also moves to my belly. Now from here, I have a lot of structure on this side, and I can also move into St. George without difficulty. So my St. George parry, if I was, for example, already on the inside guard, someone cuts for me, boom, same idea. Or alternatively, I can just come up to them in the hanging guard. It's also quite natural if I'm using a targe. But that now becomes my hanging guard. All I am is a wider stance. If I move to the outside guard, same idea. I'm just, once again, my right foot is more forward, and my guard is to the outside. So if I were to move into it, someone cuts at me, boom, very strong. The inside guard is the one that looks the most funky, if you haven't done it before, which is now, once again, I'm going to narrow up my stance, so I'm here. I'm going to move more in line with myself, and I'm going to extend my sword slightly, as well as bring my hand back. Now, we don't entirely know why the hands are doing what they're doing. A general hypothesis that I kind of like is, in these guards, I'm more looking at the potential of grabbing. So I'm either pushing my opponent's sword out to the outside and I can grab, or I'm defending up high and I can grab this way. Versus here, it's not that I can't grab, it's that from here I'm more focused on extended sort of actions, and alternatively delivering a thrust using this as a counterbalance. So it's not held up, it's just out. So this gives us a very different style of movement, a very different style of cutting as well, because with the traversal footwork, which is all about basically, it's essentially just simple steps, so 1, 2, if I want to go that way, or 1, 2, if I want to go this way. If I combine that with my cuts, so I'm starting in the outside guard, I'm going to give a 1 cut, boom. That's a lot of power to be put into a cut, and then I can fold out to guard again. And you get this very interesting style of movement that blends into its plays quite well, and it's a lot of fun. But those are other versions of familiar guards. There isn't really a medium guard in old style. I mean, maybe there kind of is, but it's just not the same. But otherwise, those are the offensive guards for backsword/saber, both old and regimental style. We'll go over the defensive guards next week. So thank you very much for watching, and let's go over stuff another time.